We are so glad that everyone is joining us today. We know we all have all kinds of millions of Zoom places to be. And in these times, there is, you know, it's just everything, everywhere, all at once, right? But before I jump into the official script, I just wanted to share a word from Norma Wong. Um, with the things that have been happening in the news, with all of the energy that has been unfolding in administration, there's a lot of fear. And so I just want to invite all of us to embrace Norma's words, inspiring words about courage, where she says that it's not the absence of fear, but what we are about in the face of fear. So, what we do despite its presence. And so, I hope that kind of sets the container for how we're hoping to proceed in this moment. That though we know we are in unprecedented and uncertain times and the pressure around all sides, that what we're doing in this moment, focusing back in on the call to build movement and power and collaborate, and ultimately at the heart of that, solidarity, is just so critical and important. With that, let's jump into our official run of show. So, I'm Jasmine Banks. I am the Director of Storytelling and Narrative for LibGen. First, just so you know, we are recording today's session and we'll make the recording available to everyone afterward. That way, if you need to jump off early or you want to revisit any part of this conversation, we'll have that resource available to you. Thank you for our partners, friends, and LibGen staff for joining us. We also have closed captions, so just click the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn them on if you'd like. We're going to also be using a chat box for comments and the Q&A box for questions. So feel free to collaborate, have conversations, build connections in the chat. And then if you have any official questions, please put them there during the webinar. We'll also do our best to get as many of the questions answered as we can. So please definitely upvote any questions that you're interested in. A quick note about engagement. We're here to talk about some heavy stuff. We know structural inequality, racial justice, oppression economy. Those are really big, heavy things. But we also want this to be a space for care and solidarity. So please remember to engage respectfully, uplift each other's voices, and center our communities that are navigating these policies. All right, with that being said, let's jump in today. Oh, lost my view. Today's briefing is all about the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, this massive handout to billionaires that House Republicans just passed. We know it's a direct attack on Black, Latina, and Indigenous working people, and we're here to unpack it, understand its impacts, and get equipped to fight back together. We've got an incredible lineup partner of our partners joining today. We've got Color of Change. We hope to see Erica from Family Values at Work, and then we have the good people from Frameworks Institute. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to hear from them about what this bill is, what it means for our communities, and how we can frame the conversation to build people power and push back against the oppression economy. So let's dive in. I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy to get us started.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thank you all for coming on. Thanks for the speakers that have joined us. Um, I think, like everybody, I've been trying to figure out, trying to make sense of all that's going on. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is I'm rewatching Game of Thrones. And there's this interesting quote from Game of Thrones that I'm going to share. I'm not going to go into the scene. You got to rewatch it on your own. But Cersei Lannister says to one of her people, she says, "Power is power." And I think it's a illustrative quote because this is how people that bend towards tyranny understand and view power. And I think what we are seeing today, in a lot of ways, are people that believe they have ultimate power. And we're seeing what they do when they believe that they have ultimate power. Now, I believe that they wrongly think that they have all the power. I think we have a lot of power. There's a lot of power that we have to stop them. We're seeing that. We saw that this weekend. Uh, but I think that's what we're seeing. The other thing I think is that this ain't new, particularly for Black and brown folks. We've seen U.S. tyranny in real action. Um, just ask the ghosts of Andrew Jackson and Ronald Reagan. And we've seen it used to harm brown and black and brown folks. So, and what we at Liberation Generation, and why I bring up that this isn't new, is because we see all that this is going on, all this stuff been happening on Capitol Hill that we're here to talk about today, as a continuation of what we call the oppression economy. And the oppression economy being an economy, the economy that we all live in, where a very small group of very wealthy and powerful, mostly white individuals wield their power by extracting from black and brown folks and from everyday folks. And they do it through theft, exclusion, and exploitation. Um, and we've seen it through theft, theft through colonization, theft through gentrification. We've seen it through exclusion, whether that's Jim Crow or mass deportation. We've seen it through the exploitation of workers, whether that be slavery, gig workers, retail workers, hourly wage workers, tip workers. We've seen this happen in our economy. And this dumpster fire that they call a big, beautiful bill, in our view, is just a hardening of that oppression economy. It's a theft. They're raiding the US Treasury in what economies would call a redistribution that is not in the way they usually talk about it, but what it is a redistribution of the wealth that most of us hold and have and are contributing to the economy and to our government, and they're stealing it for their own gain. And they're doing it by hijacking our democracy. And they're doing it so that they can have control and dominance over our economic lives. And let me explain what I mean by that. And to do so, I'm going to go back to 2017. So in 2017, Tangerine Man and at the time Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, raided the U.S. Treasury through a tax bill similar like to this to the tune of $2 trillion. $2 trillion that went into the pockets of very wealthy individuals, and that most folks, from low-income folks all the way to many of the folks sitting on this call, did not see any benefit from. And now, today, what's going on Capitol Hill is they were so successful and so emboldened by the power that they believed that they held, that they're now bringing into this, moving forward, that they are the same president with this time Speaker Johnson are going to raid the Treasury to the tune of somewhere between 3.8 and $5.2 trillion. So over 20 years, we're talking about the theft of $7 trillion from people in the United States contributing to this economy, contributing to our government and our day-to-day lives for the benefit of a very few. So now, if I was in a call with like MAGA folks, they'd be saying, whoa, 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 this isn't theft. This is stimulating the economy. It's putting money in the pockets of people. Well, the data doesn't prove that out. Reports by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, when they looked at the 2017 report, it showed that 80%, particularly for Black and brown folks, 80% of the benefits of that bill went to white households. Only 5% went to Black households, even though Black households make up 10% of taxpayers. This bill they looked at, and the top 1% in this bill would get about $70,000 in a tax cut from this bill. $70,000 is going to go into the pockets of the top 1% on average. That's about $1,300 a week. For the bottom 20%, of taxpayers, they're going to get a whopping $300. That's $2.50 per week, which can get you a cup of coffee at 7-Eleven. You know, get the seventh one free. Well, they might say, whoa, wait. Well, it's still not theft because we're doing all this because we know we really need to make sure that we can stimulate the economy and people can be taken care of in the economy. Well, how is that going to happen? If in order to pay for this tax cut, they are targeting immigrants by cutting their health care, ACA, Medicaid, and Medicare. They're taking the child tax credit away from tax-paying immigrants. They're and they're doing this at the same time. They're increasing the budgets for ICE and for border control. And they're also, at the same time, they are continuing the work of knockoff Lex Luthor, Elon Musk, by continuing the work of Doge by cutting the budgets of federal agencies that are making the lives of Black and brown folks a little bit easier in this oppression economy. Agencies like HUD, the Department of Education, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Environmental Protection Agency, FEMA, and many, many others. So I'm going to leave you with this. I'm finally gotten to an age where I can say, I've been doing this for a while. And this is my fifth tax bill that I've had some way of doing some work on since in my career. The first was two bills by the Bush administration, a bill by the Obama administration, and then these two bills being put forth by the Trump administration. And there's two things that I want to leave you with. Lessons and things that I think we should think about for the future. The first thing is, in all of those cases, the tax advocacy field was very academic, very deferential to elite power, and also was largely led by white leaders. And look, well-intended white leaders. And many of them are my friends and people I'm still working with today. But what I know of the last time that when we have really won stuff, when we have really taken on power and won, it has come from the grassroots. It has fought against elite power, and people of color were on the forefront of leading in those movements. And that's what I believe we have to do in this moment in order to win. The second thing I learned, and I want to talk about, is that in each of those cases, it was talked about like, okay, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is once in a lifetime. We're never going to see federal dollars like this and be able to really, really fight for federal dollars like this. And what happened was, when we had that mindset, was when we lost, it was very debilitating. It was very hard to take. And a lot of people walked away and didn't want to join the fight again. And what I'll say is, this fight should be the beginning. Yes, we have to stop this bill, but we cannot stop there. Whatever happens at the end of this battle, we have to begin the next battle. Because the battle is not about this bill. It's not about stopping this bill. It's about creating a tax system, a tax code that is liberating and not oppressive, that is actually working for communities of color and not against them. And that is the work that we must begin when this fight is over, and keep that work on. And that work is going to be a long haul into the future. So thank you all for coming. And I'm excited to continue with you in this fight.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate your level of clarity and intention with how you enter in these conversations. And just the fact that bold leaders like yourself are willing to name the problem as it is, that you're not gonna, pull punches. You're going to make change in service of clarity and a kind of sharpness around the analysis. Part of that is around how we tell the story, how we frame messages. And that's why it is such a joy and honor to invite the next presenters up. If we can get Clara and Drew here. These are the good folks from Frameworks who I'm going to pass the mic to and invite them to give an introduction about who they are, their work, and why story, narrative, messaging is such a crucial part of the strategy of addressing this intergenerational theft, these impact to our community. So take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Jasmine. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. Challenging moment, but I'm really grateful to have the chance to be in space with you all today. I'm Drew Vollmer from the Frameworks Institute, joined by my colleague Clara. I'm going to lay out some things, some introduction about framing and the work that we've been doing over the last few months with Liberation in a Generation to co-design research to identify an effective strategy for framing tax reform for organizers. And then Clara is going to really walk us through the details of that strategy and what it looks like in practice. For those of you who aren't familiar with Frameworks, we're a nonprofit organization. We do framing and narrative research to identify effective ways of talking about kind of a range of different social and political issues. And then we work with organizers and advocates in the progressive movement working across issues to take those frames and use them in the service of change. So if we can move on here, when we talk about framing, we're really just talking about how we present information, how we talk about things. It's really important, obviously, what we say, but it's also important how we say it. So the choices that we make about the values we use, the metaphors we employ, the kinds of stories that we tell, all of these things really matter in the ways that they bring people into the issues that we are working on, the ways they can engage people, energize people, motivate them, as well as building demand for the kinds of changes that Jeremy was talking about that are so desperately needed on these issues around our tax system. So if we can move on here. When we set out to do this research with Liberation in a Generation, we had a couple of goals. The main goal is to identify frames and narratives that can help engage movement-aligned people in target communities, so especially young people, working people, Black people, and other people of color. So the idea is we need frames and narratives that are effective for organizers in reaching the audiences that you're trying to reach. We want those frames also to build demand for the needed changes to the tax system, the changes that are needed to unrig the tax system, and frames that can build a sense of collective agency around those changes. So when I talk about collective agency, I'm just talking about the personal sense that people can and want to be engaged in collective action to bring about change. So the right kinds of frames and narratives can actually foster that sense of collective agency and in turn be a really, really useful resource for organizers trying to bring people into the movement. Go forward here. So the research that we're going to be talking about, there are findings that come out of a nationally online survey experiment. This was with over 2,700 survey participants in which people were randomly assigned to read one of several different framed messages and then answer a set of survey questions, gauging their understanding of the tax system, their sense, their attitudes, like that sense of collective agency, their support for different kinds of policy changes. The thing that I want to flag here and underline is the sampling that we used in this experiment, which is this sample was constructed to look like the folks that you're trying to organize, the kinds of communities, the target communities for this organizing work. So the sample was majority young, 18 to 34-year-olds, lower income and non-white. All participants in the sample identified as Democrats or as independents who lean Democratic, and all participants indicated engagement in activism or civic activity. So said they had participated in protests or volunteered at a grassroots organization. Again, signs that these people are movement aligned and kind of ready to engage in collective action, but need to potentially be brought into action, particularly around the tax system. So we can go forward. This work builds on work that we've been doing as part of our culture change project over the last couple of years. Liberation and Generation is an advisory board member in this project, and so has collaborated on this research at earlier stages. The Culture Change Project is a project we've been doing to understand how our culture in the United States is shifting in response to this time of social and political upheaval that we're in. One of the big findings that has come out of this research is a big rise in what we call the system is rigged mindset. So, this is this basic assumption that the system is rigged by the powerful few at the expense of the rest of us. This has become incredibly, overwhelmingly dominant across groups and is used to make sense of pretty much every issue. So, while people disagree about a lot of things, Americans across race, ethnicity, political party, age, gender, education, you name it, agree that the system is rigged and are using this idea, this recognition that the system is rigged to make sense of pretty much every issue. We have been conducting research over the last couple of years to understand how to engage with this way of thinking and steer it in more productive directions into kind of a more progressive direction and away from the kind of xenophobic, racist, and authoritarian directions that we see MAGA take in trying to capture and this idea that the system is rigged to interpret this in ways that lead people in all of these in terrible directions. We can go forward. So that's the work that we're building on in this research to talk about the tax system and the ways in which it is rigged. But to get there, first we have to unpack this basic mindset, this idea that the system is rigged, which is grounded in, again, the assumption that the powerful few are rigging the system at the expense of the many, if we can go forward here. Um, each of these slots can be filled in really different ways. So sometimes when people think about the people in power, they are imagining that it's corporations or billionaires. At other times, politicians, coastal elites, media, the deep state. Again, there are different stories that people tell that fill in these blanks in quite different ways. The mindset, as I mentioned, is used to make sense of pretty much every system in American society. And then who is harmed by this rigged system? Again, there are those MAGA right-wing ways of filling in the blanks here where supposedly it's the white middle class or native-born Americans who are harmed by this rigged system. Whereas alternatively, sometimes when people apply this, they're thinking about the 99% or people of color recognizing the ways in which the system is in fact rigged in ways that are part of the oppression economy that Jeremy was talking about that create a fundamentally unjust society. So again, this mindset can go in these really, really different directions across all of these applications. What isn't filled in is the how, this mechanism. How is it that the system is rigged? What is it that those in power are doing to rig the system? How does that shape how the system works? And how does that lead regular people to be harmed? And in fact, this lack of understanding about how the system works is part of what gives this mindset its malleability, its flexibility. The good news is that over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of research to figure out how do we talk about rigged systems in ways that prevent it from thinking from going sideways, inoculate against racist, authoritarian, xenophobic ways of thinking, and step into the openings that this mindset poses to think about the ways that systems actually work to create oppression and exploitation in American society and the ways in which power actually functions. So we figured out ways of talking about rigged systems that take advantage of the strengths of this widely shared mindset. In the research that we've done with Liberation and Generation, we've been exploring this question of how we can leverage this idea of rigged systems to talk specifically about tax reform and particularly in an organizing context. And the great news is that we have found that there are ways of talking about rigged systems that accomplish the goals that we set out to accomplish. So there are three core elements of this framing strategy. It starts by appealing to an ideal of either popular self-government or freedom from domination, ideals that really lean into the notion of collective power. It includes an explanation of how the tax system is rigged. So Clara is going to unpack this more, but you can either spotlight a particular aspect of the tax system, talk about how it's rigged, and then how it can be unrigged, or you can zoom out and talk about how the tax system as a whole is rigged at scale, all of the ways in which it's rigged, and then in turn give people really a sense of the way in which we could fundamentally remake the tax system. Critically here, we want to make sure that the problem and solution match. So we have if we're going specific on the problem, we want to go specific on the solution. If we're going big on the problem, we want to go transformative on the solution. So we need to match the scale of the problem and the solution. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Clara, who's going to help us make sense of this and unpack what all of this actually looks like in real life. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Drew. All right. So I'm going to give some examples of what it can look like to use language that executes these three core elements, talk a little bit more about them. And I'm going to start by talking about how we conceptualize framing tax policy and tax reform in general. And then at the end, I'll give some an example of how you might apply this framing strategy to talk about the big, beautiful bill. So the first element in this framing strategy that Drew mentioned was appealing to this ideal of popular self-government or the ideal of freedom from domination. And what this does is build that sense of agency that Drew was talking about. We were really interested in when we were doing this research, the idea that the feeling that people have that if they joined work to reform the tax system, that could make a difference in the world. And two ways that we found of building that sense of collective agency was appealing to the ideal, the aspiration of popular self-government, the idea that power is with the people. We should have a right to govern ourselves. What happens in society is up to us, and nothing can happen without our consent. So using that language that centers this idea of our collective power and the idea that our society should be governed by the people. And another way that you can build this sense of collective agency is by talking about freedom from domination. So the idea that no one has some natural right to rule over others. We should be free from domination. We shouldn't have to live according to the whims of powerful people, and that therefore we can and must reject their rules. So this is language that you can use to foster that sense that we should come together to demand change. Right, so this is another step in this core framing strategy. One problem that we've seen happen when you use system is rigged framing is that people can just feel that problems are so big and they're caused by the people who wield power in our society, that change can just feel overwhelmingly difficult. So this is a strategy that helps foster, again, that sense that change is actually possible to help people want to engage in this work. And one thing you need to do to do that is to overcome what we call the ambition feasibility paradox. And I'll walk through quickly what we mean by that. So if you're talking about a rigged system writ large, so if you're talking about the tax system being rigged at large in so many different ways, the natural solution for that is a solution that would unrig the whole system, that would match the scale of the problem. But that doesn't always seem feasible to people. To have a huge radical solution seems like we can't get that done. We can't get that done in this current environment. And so there's this paradox between a solution that feels big enough to solve the problem and a solution that feels actually doable. And there are two ways that you can overcome this ambition feasibility paradox. The first is to focus in on a specific way in which a system is rigged. So a specific way in which the tax system is rigged. Maybe it's the low estate taxes as one element of the rigged system. And you can explain exactly how that works and how that benefits the very wealthy. And then when people understand that, there's a natural solution that flows from it about changing the estate tax. And so that solution feels feasible. It's one solution and it's addressing one part of the problem. But it is possible to talk about a whole rigged system at scale. So for example, the extent to which the one big beautiful bill is this comprehensive set of policies that all rig our system, that all contribute to this oppression economy. It is possible to talk similarly about solutions at scale that could work to fundamentally change our tax system. So again, you have to explain the different ways in which the system is rigged, the tax system is rigged. And then there's another key element to include that overcomes the potential fatalism that you run a risk of queuing here when talking about really big problems. And that is appealing to this idea of power through numbers. Um, and when you execute this framing strategy, it is actually possible to talk about transformative solutions for our tax system. And I'll show a little bit about what sort of language cues this idea of power in numbers. So this is doable if we leverage our collective power of the 99%. When we come together with the strength of the many, our calls for action are louder, and we can force the government to make change. We can demand a new tax system by exercising our collective power, and that can actually make it a reality. So you're showing how transformative power is possible by appealing to the power that we have if we come together and exercise our collective power. So here's an example of how all these different core elements can be applied to talk about the big, beautiful bill. And I'll walk through it and just highlight which element is which. So power lies with the people, this idea of popular self-government. But ultra wealthy individuals and corporations are working with the government to rig our tax system and keep the people down. There's that system is rigged frame. The so-called big beautiful bill is designed to benefit the very rich at the expense of us, the rest of us, by cutting programs we depend on like Medicaid and food assistance. The top 1% is set to gain an average of $80,000 next year. The bill makes it easier than ever for rich people to pass on huge amounts of wealth to their children with little to no tax. It taxes investments in corporate profits at much lower rates than the wages of working people. So here you're getting to that explanation of how the system is rigged. So how is it rigged on all sorts of different levels? Yet another example of how our system is rigged against those of us with less wealth, including working people, Black people, and other people of color. It's time for us to come together and demand change. There's that power in numbers. If we tax inheritances, investments, and corporations at higher rates, we can provide essential services and put money in the pocket of every family. There's the solution there that matches the scale of the problem. By leveraging the power of the 99%, we can force the government to remake our rigged tax system. Again, getting to that idea of power through numbers. So this is what it looks like to apply these framing strategies when communicating about this bill. And just really quickly, a little bit more guidance that we have around communicating in this sort of highly contentious environment. The first is always say what you're for. Start off with what you're for, make an affirmative case. Don't repeat the opposition's message and then negate it because you're still giving that airtime to the opposition's message. Always fill in the blanks. That explanation is really important. Don't just assume that if you talk about who's rigging the system, ultra wealthy individuals, for example, it's going to help fill in all the blanks in those constructive ways. Do give examples of how the system affects people. When you are telling those examples and that actual personal effect on people, don't just tell those individual stories and forget to include the system. Because if we want structural change, support for structural change, we need to explain the system more. Do explain the problem to set up the solution. Don't forget to talk about the solution. Do show how change is possible, but don't leave out our collective power, that idea of power in numbers, the idea that we should have a government that does what the people want. And of course, do use everyday language and don't rely on jargon, especially because we're communicating about something that people can already think is a little wonky, like tax policy. So there's what our research shows about communicating and framing around this issue. And I will stop my share.
Wow. Thank you so much. As I shared in the chat, the Hopi people, my people, African American and Cherokee folks, Freedmen folks, and so many other people groups that our elders and ancestors taught us that whoever has the story rules the world, right? And we have been living in someone's imagination. Someone had to dream up this narrative, this story. And so it's really important that we partner with folks like Frameworks Institute, because the research and powerful tools that you provided us help us win in the battle for narrative and story. So thank you so much for your offerings and your research. I know we'll be following up with others. To get out all of your messaging and research. And I know later in the programming, we're going to have some question and answers. So I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions around specifically what they've presented, please put it in the Q&A and we will have a panel chat shortly. But in the meantime, I'm going to say goodbye and welcome up Portia. All right. Hi, friend. It is so good to see your face, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us in this work. For those who don't know that you are a powerful leader and advocate in so many places and spaces. We have a phrase, which is, you are not new to this, you are true to this, but I'm going to hand you the mic, let you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit for those who are new to Color of Change work, what you do, what the org does, and then also just share with us your impressions of the research, the impacts you're seeing on the ground related to this legislation. What is the temperature with that, and what's really moving with your base in terms of narrative, story, and this emerging unprecedented intergenerational theft. So take it away.
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to be here. My name is Portia Allen Kyle. I'm currently the Interim Executive Director at Color of Change. We are a nationwide racial justice organization powered by millions of members. And essentially what we do is leverage the power of people and narrative to hold corporations and government actors to account. And so this conversation is right up our alley for a number of different reasons, the least of which is that we have been working and organizing our members, trying to build power and build opposition to this bill. And so I appreciated, and thank you to Drew and Clara for such a straightforward and insightful. And I think I say straightforward intentionally because it is important to speak in plain English, right? And we need strategies that talk to real people in plain English. And so as we have been organizing our members, we are, seeing and experiencing and have some of a lot of the same learnings, right? It's one thing to talk about what is happening in this moment, particularly around this budget reconciliation bill as yes, there's a lot going on, with tax proposals. There are a lot of things in there that are essentially about subsidizing yachts for billionaires, turning billionaires into trillionaires, all of the things that we know are from our perch bad for democracy, bad for Black people, bad for Black communities, bad for families, bad for people of color, bad for just about everybody else who is not in the yacht owning class. But when you ask people, oftentimes about their opinion on taxes or the tax code, people don't necessarily have a tax code story. If you ask them about, their stories about how certain provisions of the code, work or, don't work, or how the system is rigged, people don't really often know how the system is rigged. And most folks can accept that some amount of rigging goes on. But most folks are actually okay with some amount of rigging, so long as it seems possible that either, folks can achieve or have access to opportunity, or they think that they can, game the system in a similar way to their benefit, right? And so it is important to go beyond. And so a lot of our messaging makes extremely clear who is standing in the way from us collectively having nice things. And that is at the core what this bill is about. And who is in the way? Corporations, billionaires, millionaires, the ultra wealthy, the political elite, who are sacrificing our democracy, who are sacrificing, our rights, our freedoms, who are sacrificing many of the things that government does do in the right direction that is about serving people. And so this bill is about taking healthcare away from folks, taking food away from, kids, taking educational opportunity away by cutting back on student financial aid. It's also about, there are a lot of embedded provisions in the bill on a lot of other issues that are not tax issues. So there are provisions in this bill that talk about AI implementation. There were attempts to put provisions in this bill about, attacking and undermining your favorite nonprofits, whether it be your favorite food bank, your local church, your, whatever it is. And it's helpful often to talk about people or to talk to people about provisions, particularly in this, I take the point, I see the question in the Q&A about like, should we refer to this as this like big, beautiful bill when it's really a cluster? Trying not to, I know this is recorded, but like when it really is anything but beautiful, anything but what would work for our families and for our communities. And when talking to folks, talking to them specifically about the various provisions, people don't have a story about the tax code per se. They do have a story about why they think they can't pay their bills. They do have a story about why, their paycheck today doesn't go as far as their paycheck did last year or 5 years ago. People can tell you about oftentimes when they have a story that relates to taxes, they can tell you how much money they were scammed out of by H&R Block, or like how much money, they were, they had to pay to Jackson Hewitt or, so on and so forth for someone to mess up the preparation of their taxes and, increase their risk of an audit. They do have stories about the cost of housing, the amount of student loan payments and whether they can repay their student loans. And as it happens, there's a provision for a lot of that exists in the tax code. And some of those provisions, are up for debate in this bill. And so our work is both about simultaneously engaging with this proposal on the table in the moment, but also a recognition long-term that there is a lot of narrative work that needs to be done on money and finances and taxes for folks generally. There's a lot of organizing to be done on moving folks on economic issues and building power around those solutions, socializing and building the popularity of solutions. There's something folks sometimes say that the only thing certain is death and taxes. And I wish we would stop saying that because it, gives the impression that taxes are inevitable and it is what it is. And some people have to lose in order for other people to win. And what we are trying to work towards is, a collective understanding that my having nice things isn't dependent on your things being raggedy, right? Like us having collectively a set of nice things isn't, dependent on other people living in scarcity and being without. And that is both about cultural beliefs about money, about why some people are rich and other people are poor, and about what is possible for collective organizing and work towards a different future and a different tax code that works better for all of us. And so I will stop there, but I've greatly appreciated both the framework's presentation and Jeremy, your overall framing at the top.
Yeah, thank you. I heard so many wonderful things in your reflection, but two really stood out to me. First of all, this politics of scarcity is a fabrication. We can move from a place of abundance, and just because someone else has nice things doesn't mean there's not enough for all of us to have nice things. And the second thing that I heard you say is that yes, we have to block the bad, but we also have to figure out how to bridge and broaden as we build the good, the world we want to hear, or excuse me, that we want to live into. And just little nuggets of wisdom. And you just had like 5 minutes and you already just like slam dunked on all of it. So thank you for all that you do as a movement leader. And I want to welcome all of the rest of the panelists up. We're going to be opening for some Q&A, some questions. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Please make sure attendees, if you have any questions, that you go ahead and drop them in the chat. But I have a couple of questions that, as I was going through all of your work and resources, that I just wanted to uplift. And so, first, let's just go ahead and jump in with frameworks. And I'm really curious, how do organizers know when to use spotlight or zooming out around some of these message frames and narratives? Like, is it a practice? Is it a process? Just give us kind of an understanding for all of our attendees, activists, organizers, policymakers, like when you were doing this research, when did you see it most effective for folks to spotlight certain things versus zoom out and help to have audiences embrace a fuller picture? Feel free, everyone, just to come off mute.
That's a really great question. I think part of it is strategy dependent, what you're trying to accomplish or organize around. And I think it's maybe helpful to work backwards from what solution
Mhm.
you're trying to push for work towards. If it's one particular solution, that's designed to address one particular harm, then it's helpful to use that spotlighting strategy. And if you're trying to organize around something really comprehensive, like this bill, writ large, then that zooming out strategy is helpful. And similarly, emphasizing that power that we have in numbers is really important.
Oh, okay. That's excellent. So the other piece of that is we're balancing, and I think in the nonprofit sector, in social change movements, we are often holding this tension between being too data dependent, which has its own potholes, versus how do we get this to the regular folks, right? As Selena said, give it to me in rice and beans. Say it to me plain, right? So how do organizations ensure that their messaging is both research-based, but also authentic to the lived experiences and lives of the communities they work with? And maybe share a little bit about an experience you had around sampling or anything that you feel would help us kind of understand the precarity of designing these kind of narrative research projects.
Sure. Okay, I can take this. It's a great question. It's a really complicated question. I think there are like a couple of things I'll say about it. One is this is one of the reasons why we're so grateful for partnering with Liberation and Generation, right? Like if we were going out and designing this research on our own as researchers, that would be bad, right? We would kind of not know where to start. And so some of what we're relying on our partners for is that understanding of what's most relevant and what's most useful for the communities that various kind of networks are working in. But the other thing I'll just say is part of why we do framing research, which is that it's flexible. So these frames, at the end of the day, ideals like popular self-government or freedom from domination, they're not magic words. It's not a script that you say in the same way to every audience and every community that you're in. It's a set of high-level ideas that can be used really flexibly in ways that the folks who are using them have the knowledge of the communities that they're engaging and the audiences that they're trying to reach and can use that knowledge to adapt and tailor the way that they're employing those frames in the context, right? So it's always, of course, people know their communities in ways that we as researchers don't. The way that we're testing these is a level up, and that's intentional. It's meant to be, these strategies are meant to be used flexibly by folks on the ground in ways that take advantage of their knowledge of the communities that they're engaging with and their audiences. So again, they're meant to be flexed and adapted in ways that make sense for the particular folks that they're talking to.
Great. So more of a position with your personal lens put on top of that approach. Am I translating? Excellent. Awesome. This next question's for you, Portia. How does the big, beautiful bill intersect with broader racial justice fights like voting rights, criminal justice, education? And how can we build some more intersectional solidarity to see this sort of thing that on its face appears to be deeply wonky and in the bill, like in the weeds of reconciliation and finance, but is really about true, like creating the living conditions for dignity and survival for all of our people. So yeah, just kind of help us understand how it all intersects.
I will answer this in two parts. I mean, and the first is around the impacts, the human impacts of the bill itself. I mean, like this proposal essentially will make our nation poorer, sicker, right? Like all around. And it will do that by, maybe this ties to the research question a little bit, right? But there is so much research out there that has talked about the benefits of education and the pursuit of higher education. This bill makes that harder for regular folks to achieve. Folks who, can't go to who can't go. I mean, there are state schools that are charging, $50,000 out of state tuition, and those are state schools, right? Like for folks that can't pay $50,000 out of pocket, for folks that can't pay $5,000 out of pocket, this bill makes it harder to attain. And, higher education is associated with so many life outcomes that also will then be made harder. This bill, directly takes money out of people's pockets by taking away and cutting some of the Medicaid subsidies. A lot of those, it's not just about, there are a lot of state Medicaid parts that are called different things. The state childhood health insurance program is, often funded through Medicaid. That goes by a different name in every state, but there are a number of folks who probably, if you say, what are your thoughts on Medicaid, are like, I don't receive Medicaid, but you ask them if they receive S-chip or, something, of the sort for whatever, it is for their state. Oh yeah, my child is insured through that. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a lot of downstream consequences we really need to consider that are not about what happens this year, but what happens when the federal government cuts so much funding from core programs and essential services, and when states only have but so many ways to make that money up on the back end down the line. Yeah. The second way, which is a little bit of a different way of thinking about the impacts of this bill, but I would argue that the extension of the 2017 tax cuts, which is a part of, what they are trying to extend today, has an impact on the entire nonprofit and philanthropic sector. And that is like not just about those who are fighting and advocating for taxes, but like what we saw since 2017 is a decrease overall in charitable giving. And that is partially due to the increase in the standard deduction, which is a disincentive for folks who, give to your church, to your local food bank, to your, kids' school, to Color of Change, like to a number of sources, right? That previously folks were able to perhaps deduct from their taxes, that because the standard deduction increased and fewer people are itemizing. This is very technical, I'm sorry, but like fewer people are itemizing, it really took a number of folks off the board in terms of small dollar donors, et cetera, whose gifts previously may have been tax deductible, but now don't have the individual expenses high enough to make itemizing make sense. And we've seen, itemized taxpayers who itemize just like have decreased significantly over the past, since 2017. Those who take the charitable tax deduction have also gone down to about 3% of folks. And what that means is, especially for the progressive side of things, who are much more reliant on smaller dollar grassroots donors, is that there are fewer smaller dollar grassroots donors in the pool to subsidize what philanthropy does, to subsidize what big philanthropy does, what family foundations do, et cetera. And that means there are way fewer resources to even engage in this type of work, to activate communities, to reach out, provide direct services, to, engage in a number of different ways. And we should all be concerned about what that means, because what this bill is doing is rewriting the rules of money and power and the distribution of wealth and skewing it to the top. So that disproportionate giving, and we saw this election cycle, the way it was dominated by billionaires in political giving, that will have downstream effects as well on our ability to organize our communities and fight for nice things. And we all should be worried about that,
Yes.
especially progressive philanthropy if they want to secure their investments.
Listen, it's almost like you are reading my mind, because my next question that I'm opening up for everyone, but I would love to toss it to Jeremy first, is really one of the things you surfaced, now Portia is surfacing it, is that after these past tax fights, some people in groups, they just step back from this space and we're like, okay, well, we'll wait for the next fight to come along. And so my question is, what can funders and others with resources, actual material resources, and connections do to help to ensure that there's a consistent, sustained work between the tax fight, right? And the first one and the second one and the ones that will come after. And we're not just booming and busting funding when we think the threat has dissipated. So, that constant ebb and flow is such an important issue to address, especially in times of urgency and scarcity when conditions start to feel really tense and things start to feel lean. We need those funders, we need those resource organizers to really have a plan and have our back. So, Jeremy, what can funders and others with resources do to be consistent and to show up? And then we'll toss it to Andrew after that, and then Portia.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I've been doing this a while, and there's literally, after all of those tax bills, the people that just passed the tax bill already get to work to think about how they can lower the taxes even more and more and more. And every single time, what you see, if you see the charts, the highest tax rate is going down and down and down and down and down. And what I'll say is, and I referenced it in my remarks, is there has been a belief, I think, in the advocacy of Washington, D.C., that many of the funders support, that it's like, oh, we got this. We can take care of this inside the Beltway. We can get we got our tax lobbyists. Our tax lobbyists can take on their tax lobbyists, and we're gonna handle this kind of in the arena that is Washington, D.C. And that has not worked. It has been a losing strategy. So what we're doing, and we're partnering with for example, Family Values at Work and others to do, is we're taking these conversations out of the Beltway and into communities. And we're doing that through popular education and things like that, so that people can feel empowered and educated around what is the way in which we should attack these advocacy efforts. That's why the work with frameworks is so important, because a lot of it is about, how do I talk about this? The other things people want to know is that, look, people want to know how the system works. And this idea that people don't care about understanding, I haven't found that. I've been out there and people are engaging. They're excited about the information that we're giving them, and they're wanting to engage, and they're like, give us more. So I believe that the thing that we have to do is to really get out there and bring these conversations to where people are and take them out of the kind of echo chamber of the think tanks and the advocacy organizations.
Yeah, Andrew, Portia, Clara, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, +1 to all of that, and I can't underline enough the point about providing resources and funding to that work that is happening in between, in the non-crisis moments, to build power and build organization on the ground. I know, and again, I'm coming at this from a particular vantage point, which is the framing research side. I can just speak from the framing research side that when we are doing work that is ongoing, the ability to then quickly figure out how to respond in the moment is so much easier than when we are trying to scale up a set of work that is starting from out of nowhere. And I think that is true across different areas, and certainly not just true from the kind of framing perspective. So that consistency, I think, is really, really important.
Yes, thank you. Go for it, Portia.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, because 100% agree with everything that's been said, is the need to connect this tax fight to other fights. Like, this is actually a democracy fight.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, and the way in which we galvanize funding to, in election cycles, like, we need that same energy. The budget gets voted on every year. This is not the first year, won't be the last year. Every year, these decisions are being made, and, not to be cliche, but like, folks are on the menu. because we are not resourced to be at the table in the ways in which we need to be. And so that connection to keep it going across cycles, particularly across election cycles, and bringing that into communities, as Jeremy said, is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the first things that I learned as an organizer, activist, and community grassroots builder is that budgets are moral choices about what we care about and who we're investing in. And so I'll just throw in the South needs more resources and support and love. So, yes, there's that. Thank you all for your brilliance. All the clarity and the commitment. It's so deeply felt. And to everybody who joined us today, thank you for showing up, for being in this work with us, and for holding this moment with care and urgency. So I know we're 1 minute over time, but I'm a fast talker, like I said, born and raised in the South. So let's quickly get ourselves with a few key takeaways. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill is more than a budget, right? It's a political strategy to cement the oppression economy and permanently shift wealth and power away from our communities. We heard today that the antidote isn't just resistance, it's about building a new story, one where racial justice is at the center of tax and economic policy. And thanks to frameworks, we have research-backed narrative strategies in hand now, tools we can use to shape public thinking and bring more people into this fight in ways that are grounded in truth, dignity, and possibility. As for what comes next, you'll be hearing from LibGen. We're going to send some follow-up emails with the recording of today's briefing, the slides, resources, and other ways to plug in. We're inviting you to use the messaging tools that we share from Frameworks Institute, and we are just so grateful for all of the advocacy and community work that we know our attendees do every single day. So thank you so much for being here with us. If you have any questions for me, please email me at jasmine@liberationandgeneration. Before you sign off, please drop your contact information in the chat if you would like to share with other folks to connect with you. Otherwise, I hope you have a day that is rooted in hope and in a vision of what we can build together when we truly realize a liberation economy. So thank you all for joining us.